Tonight, ISIS is claiming responsibility for a suicide bombing that killed scores of people celebrating a marriage in Afghanistan. The blast tore through a wedding hall in Kabul, killing 63 people and injuring 182 others. Now, this attack comes amid questions about the Trump administration's plan to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Here's the president on that today.
A lot of bad things are happening in Afghanistan and some very positive things, but look, we're there for one reason. We don't want that to be a laboratory, okay? It can't be a laboratory for terror.
And that brings us to your weekend presidential brief, a segment we bring you every Sunday featuring the most pressing national security issues the president will wake up to tomorrow. And with us now is CNN national security analyst Samantha Vinograd, who helped prepare the daily presidential briefing for President Obama. Sam, how does this gruesome attack factor into the discussions and negotiations with the Taliban and the U.S. troop presence in Afghanistan? Well, Anna, there are multiple terrorist threats in Afghanistan, and making a deal with the Taliban won't make them go away. Arguably, they could increase the terrorist threats if we withdraw too quickly. The deal with the Taliban, the negotiations are focused on getting the Taliban to renounce their ties to al-Qaeda in exchange for some kind of U.S. troop withdrawal. The attack this weekend was not perpetrated by al-Qaeda. It was perpetrated by an ISIS affiliate in Central Asia, which has been active for several years. The ISIS affiliate battles coalition forces, Afghan forces, the Taliban, and has at times focused on Shia minorities within Afghanistan. The Pentagon has warned that ISIS has gained territory in Afghanistan and that it retains the intent and eventually the capability to launch international attacks, including potentially against the United States. That begs the question of how a U.S. drawdown would factor in, and the devil's in the details on this. We have 14,000 troops on the ground right now. These terrorist groups are still launching attacks. They're still active. And if we draw down, the focus is really going to be on what kind of counterterrorism capability we leave behind and what else we're doing to stop terrorism financing, recruitment, and other means of support. We know the president met with his team on Afghanistan when he was spending his time in New Jersey. He was also tweeting about a whole host of other things, including what's happening in Hong Kong, the protests there. What should the U.S. posture be on that? Well, President Trump is actually, I hope, preparing to see Chinese President Xi Jinping at the G7 next weekend. And what he should be doing is figuring out a way to lay out the cost for Chinese interference or aggression against Hong Kong. From the Chinese perspective, Hong Kong and Taiwan operate under what's called a one country, two systems principle. They are part of mainland China, but they govern themselves. China is concerned that these protests in Hong Kong could lead to a push for greater independence, and Taiwan could follow suit. We just announced also that we're selling F-16 jets to Taiwan, which is angering China further. The State Department and potentially Congress, when they come back into session, will look at sanctions against China if they act more aggressively. But Trump is on a different page. He's never been a champion for democracy, including here at home, and we know that he is really focused on ad concessions from China. You mentioned sanctions. The Trump administration hasn't been afraid to sanction Iran, but now Gibraltar, we're learning, has released this Iranian vessel which had violated EU sanctions. What's going on there? This is kind of a Swiss cheese syndrome in international sanctions because EU-level sanctions don't mirror U.S. domestic law. The ship was detained for violating EU-level sanctions with respect to selling oil to Syria. The ship gave authorities assurances that they would not transport that oil to Syria. And then the U.S. Department of Justice said, well, the ship is violating U.S. law based upon our designation of the IRGC as a terrorist entity. The problem is EU law doesn't have the same applicability. The IRGC is not listed as a foreign terrorist organization, and we can't force the EU to uphold U.S. law. The question is whether U.S. authorities can give EU authorities some other reason to detain the ship. And the other thing, finally, Anna, we should be watching for is if this ship is released, whether the Iranians will release a British flag tanker that they had held on to over the summer.